about to begin. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. It's gonna be bloody fun. We're gonna kill everyone. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show. With lots of blood and lots of guts. Two horror fanatics and rock and roll nuts. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show.
Ghouls and fangs. Do you like hot things? The devil likes hot things. The devil is the hottest thing. As you know, Vampire and Devil Podcast, we have partnered with Coney Island Saucery. We are very, very honored, very pleased that Aaron has trusted the dark side with his sauces.
Oh yeah, it's time to light up those assholes and start eating some hot shit. You like that in your finger foods? You like it on your tacos? Buy some hot sauce from the Hot Sauce Kings, Coney Island Sauceries.
Don't forget, use the coupon code, the discount code of Vampire and Devil to get 15% off of all of your orders and support a great man, a great small business, and some really, really tastiness. As you can see, this ends in some prop hot sauce. You know, we like it, we use it, that we do. So Coney Island Saucery, coming at you as part of the Vampire and Devil Podcast.
Oh yeah.
Horns up, fangs out. Little bit of gore, family. What do all of these have in common? We do love a little bit of murder, which is how a lot of this began. Devil, my friend, Dario Argento.
Yeah, it's time to cross the seas and go to Italy and get a little bit of linguine parmigiana and some murderana and all that good stuff, and all the good stuff that comes along with Dario and the Italian Gallo or Giallo or Gallo or Galo or however you want to pronounce it. It's been pronounced like 17,000 different ways, so
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
It's the Italian murder, mystery, crime, horror genre that Dario has been a part of, and which we're going to talk a lot about it.
Absolutely, for sure. The one thing that I always found really interesting about Dario, brother, is the fact that, like, of course, he's considered this legendary horror director. And don't get me wrong, of course he is. He absolutely is. But the thing that's also so funny about him is I honestly consider Dario on that level. When I look at directors and writers and where I place them in the genre, I actually put Dario closer to like an Alfred Hitchcock than I put him to somebody like an Eli Roth, for example, or even like a Clive Barker, where, I just find him more of that suspense, murder mystery, crazy twists kind of thing, at least especially in his early movies, which we're going to talk about very shortly, and then of course, as he gets more into the movies that we know him for dominantly, and as well as the stuff that he did with like Masters of Horror and stuff, it becomes a little bit more of that kind of rounded out horror director that's probably more understood by, like we talk about all the time, the general populace. But that was the thing I've always liked about Dario, though, and the way that I've always considered him is I find him so interesting in that kind of like twists and turns kind of director, so much like an Alfred Hitchcock personally for myself.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely consider him, he's definitely a horror director, but I definitely would consider him, like you said, in that realm of like artsy kind of
Yeah.
more like, he's all about color in his films, and, and aspects of that. And his movies are always kind of like make you think and stuff. He's kind of like a Cronenberg and those kind of directors that are like, it's not just strictly just horror, which he does have a lot of those horror elements in, which we'll talk about, with his love of like eyeball torture and and stuff like that. I mean, he's definitely in the horror genre, and definitely in, the, like I said, these Italian films, they're definitely bloody, but they're definitely not just your normal like everyday killer or monster movies and stuff like that. A lot of his are supernatural. Like I said, with that, especially in the gallo in the that genre, it's very like they're crime noirs almost. They're very like who done it suspense thrillers, where you don't know exactly who maybe the killer is right to begin with. Where like, in traditional horror films, especially American traditional horror films, you kind of you know who Jason is right away, you know who Freddy is right away, you know who Michael Myers is right away. With this one, you kind of they're more of a guessing game sometimes of who the killer is, and sometimes it might not be who you thought it was.
No, absolutely. And I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff. I think that's also one of the reasons why me personally, I'm such a big fan of the Saw series. It is like, I like you over the years, over our time, our hundreds of years of watching horror movies, is that it's hard to get me. It's hard to get you. It's hard to get people like us that have a long history of horror movies. Saw was the first one in a long time to actually get me. I was completely sure. I was completely sure that I knew that I had it all figured out. And then when I was right, I was like, yep, boom. Then the twist happened where it turns out that the person I was so sure about was part of the game. And then the twist at the end. But anyway, I got very much into the Saw series, which I still am to this day, because every movie also gave me a little bit more backstory on John Kramer and stuff like that. So anyway, those twists, that kind of stuff, it's always been super duper appealing to me. I love that kind of whodunit style. And sometimes it's just fun to be wrong. Sometimes it's really worth the hit to the ego to be like, damn, that's well done. And it starts off right from the beginning with, his debut, when it comes to that, which is the bird with the crystal plumage.
Yeah. It's just like, like I said, that's like, I wouldn't go as far as if you're learning about Dario Argento to jump right into this one. I would go into maybe one of his more well-known ones that we'll talk about. But yeah, like, this is just your straight up like, your crime, your straight up like, horror Italian. I mean, it's this one, I think, out of almost all the other ones is probably about as close to being like purely Italian, and just you can. There's no way to say that this isn't an Italian made film, especially early on in his career. Like I said, with him, wanting to film a lot in Italy and doing places in Italy and stuff like that. But then like I said, it's like every other director, you got to branch out some while, but then you got to bring it back to to your roots. And as I said, with the first movie, man, it's just like it kind of puts a stamp on him, but it's not until the second movie that comes out, I feel, with the Deep Red, which it came out in 1975, is pretty much like if you're gonna go into Dario and you want to understand his films and just appreciate the films that he does, Deep Red is a good one to start off with.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, I love it. I love it just because, like I said, to me, I consider that really his first real movie. Like it's just like it's that first like one, and it like in the style of that you're gonna see in a Dario Argento film. And I love the fact that in this movie, it's the first time he did the score with the Goblins, and just you find out later on in all his movies for a while he's I love the fact that he uses, just like other directors, they use same actors, and he uses a lot of the same actors. But I love the fact that he uses the same people to score his films, so that they have that eerie sound. And those are like the best, like I said, those '70s movies soundtracks to me, especially those kind of soundtracks when it's like a house band or something like that. It's not like a big song or something like that. I love those. Like those themed horrors are awesome.
No, 100%, and I'm definitely with you on that because like, just going back momentarily to Plumage and then bridging it right back into Deep Red is like, because again they have that stylistic similarities based around like journalism and stuff like that, where you've got a journalist who's like, in Rome, checking, and becomes the potential bait of like a serial killer, and then Murphy morphing into the combination of a pianist and journalist kind of like team, that are like, because they're pulled into that mystery and stuff like that. But again, I love Deep Red also because like, again, you get it in Plumage, but like the red shines brighter in Deep Red, which I really do love because that's when you get the real, I think, official taste of when he goes into that genre, the murder, the horror, the gore kind of a thing. Because the funny thing is too, if you ever watched the trailer for Deep Red, I don't know if you have or watched it recently. The thing that's so funny, and I can't help but laugh, is he's already tagged as like a legend in the trailer. It's like it says something like horror legend or genre legend, Dario Argento, and I'm like, motherfucker's been around for like 5 years.
Yeah.
But I think when you put a stamp on in certain ways with not only the look, the presentation, the style, but also the writing skill, and you have already shown that you will kind of poke these kind of untouched areas, is what can kind of get you some of that clout even relatively quick. Like, even again, like we mentioned him a moment ago, a guy like Eli Roth. I'd never even heard of Eli Roth. Then Cabin Fever comes out, and it's basically the equivalent of of what Jaws did for going to the beach, Cabin Fever did for shaving your legs. But Eli touched this area, and that really hadn't been explored like that. So again, that's the thing I really respect about Dario, where he gets slapped with this kind of legendary status, what you would think would be prematurely, almost what you might think would be like kind of like a kiss of death. But he's shown that like, no, he's like, I've got a style, I'm committed to it. Italy, like Asia, I find has a very unique way that they even look at the horror genre. And it does have the ability to kind of go places that the States, it's not that they were afraid to go to, we were just more restricted at certain times and in certain ways. Where like, right around that same time was when they finally broke free in certain areas with movies like The Exorcist.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about the Dario Argento movie, especially Deep Red. It's such a perfect title, Deep Red, because of the blood in it is so deep and it's so red, and I love it because it's so over the top red. It's almost like paint. It's just so over the top red. But then again, it's another thing where it's like, it was that stamp of like that was the kind of blood you were gonna see in these movies, and continued on for a little while, especially in his career of using that like thick kind of, like I said, kind of paint sort of blood. But then like I said, then we're I love about Dario too is not only is he an awesome writer and awesome director of these movies, especially Deep Red to begin with. Here's the first movie that he's known for, and like I said, bringing in Goblin to do the soundtrack, which he'll do for a while. He also brought in the mother of his child, Aja Argento, which we'll talk about later on. But with his, I guess you can call her his wife. I don't think they officially ever really got married, but with what was her name? Daria. And with her, which is funny because it's Dario Argento and she's Daria, so it's kind of like you guys were kind of sort of made for each other, I guess. But yeah, it's she's in this movie, and she's in the multiple movies of his throughout the career, which we'll talk about. So I love the fact that, like you said, it's kind of like a family affair when it comes to Dario Argento. Some of it being good, some of it being bad, and some of it being traumatizing, which we'll talk about, throughout the list of Dario movies. But I love the fact that it's like he has no issues of throwing his family into the fire, as they say.
No, absolutely, for sure. And I love that you brought up Goblin, because I just think that's so great, because I feel like Goblin for Dario is, I can't even really say modern day because he's been doing it for so long, but with certain resurgences of recent movies, let's say, it kind of does work a little bit. Where I do feel you've got Goblin is Dario's Danny Elfman to Tim Burton. Like that's Dario's guys, versus, this is Tim's guy. Like, they get each other. They understand. And I love that trust. It's funny, and we're about to get into this movie, so I'm not going to say the movie because I have one other point to bring up. But the one thing that was cool is I had the opportunity at one point to see Goblin, which I did, and my God, are they good. But they were performing a soundtrack live with the movie playing in the background. But the venue had a lot of technical issues when it came to the movie. They couldn't get it going. They couldn't get it staying on. They couldn't get it going right. And it was just causing Goblin's set to just run and run and run. And then it was getting ready to just eat right in. It was eating into the next series of next bands, like seriously into their set times. So eventually Goblins just had to say fuck it, and they just put together just a bitchin' set, and they were really awesome. I've been saying this forever, and I'm gonna have to get back on this, but I'm so long overdue for a Goblin t-shirt. Like, I just need to find one so I can just rock it all the time. But anyway, yeah, there's so much cool about that red paint, like the butcher knife, hit is just bleeding out that paint. But then, just like you said, man, you don't have Dario definitely doesn't have a problem with throwing his family into the fire, just like he didn't have a problem throwing some dude under the bus or under the car in this case.
Yeah. The ending kill of being dragged over and over and over again is it gets to the point like, okay, I'm pretty sure the dude's dead. Like, this is
dragged by, and then we're just gonna hit him too.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And then, like you were saying, with that Goblin and stuff like that, yeah, like I got a chance a couple times to see them, and yeah, it's so awesome. And I know exactly, what you're segueing into it. Actually, one time when I got to see Goblin play, they were playing on a level of doing this movie, which was the soundtrack for Suspiria, which for me is probably, it's probably, I mean. I don't know if I can go as far as saying it's my favorite of all the Dario Argento movies, but it's probably up there, and it's probably one of Dario Argento's most well-known ones. Like, I think if anybody knows any Dario Argento movie, the first movie they're gonna mention is Suspiria, which to me is awesome. I love the fact that this movie is awesome. I love the fact that when this movie came out, they kind of already had the idea in their head, but I love how they continue it on, and we'll talk about it as we go on. But this is the first movie of the witches, which they talk about. So I love that they, that Suspiria is kind of the trilogy of the Mother of Tears, which is about three witches, and the first one is in Suspiria that we find out about.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I mean, You know, just where because of where this particular vampire was conceived at. You know, I do have a fondness for witches, man. You know, but my beloved home, my namesake. You know,
Yep.
being Salem. So I do love that. And again, taking it back to previous stuff that we've done, like when we were talking about Antichrist and being part of that specific trilogy, I love trilogies or characters that transcend multiple movies, but aren't designed to be Suspiria 1, Suspiria 2, Suspiria 3, or Antichrist 1, so on and so forth. I love the fact that it's done that way. And that's the thing I thought was really, really cool. And I love the way that Dario sets it up with this, is with that particular, like, you know, mother, superiorium. Like, I mean, it's a really cool thing. But the other thing I love about that kind of stuff is, frankly, it's also a very ballsy move. Again, he's already by this time becoming, if not become, very established. But at the same time, it's still early enough in his career when you're going to put something out there. Again, doesn't mean that Suspiria couldn't have fallen flat and there wouldn't have been a need for him to continue on with those other introductions, because it might have fallen kind of onto irrelevancy. But I do love the fact that he had this plan and this idea for the mothers and was like, I'm committed to the cause, and brings that first one out to get everything started.
Oh yeah, yeah, and like I said, and like we were talking about earlier, with Dario being that more of like artsy and kind of like that artsy horror. Deep Red had a little bit of that, but Suspiria is where that art kind of really, really resonates. A very, very artsy film. I mean, even just like the whole premise of the movie, with them going to like to a dance school and like all this stuff like that, and all the colors that are used throughout the whole movie, with lots of reds and lots of greens and kind of everything kind of being in there. I mean, even the subtleness of the witches, where you hear the names of the witches every so often in the background, and the music, like I said, with the music again, with Goblin and going with those like hard chords, where all of a sudden you hear the dun 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 dun. It's like a lot of those kind of things where, like you said, it's very, the music just adds on to the suspense and horror of these movies. And like I said, with Suspiria, to me, like I said, it's just I just love it. I mean, you got everything in it. I mean, it's got like just craziness in it. It's got supernaturals in it. It's got fucking people just getting whacked like crazy in this movie. And then, like I said, it's kind of odd that out of all the films that Dario has done so far, that this is really the only movie that I can think of, at least right now, that had been remade from
Yeah.
Dario's collection, with Suspiria being remade.
No, absolutely. And the one other thing too that Suspiria, what the hell are we talking about? Like,
Suspiria.
Suspiria. The one other thing that Suspiria has that I love is it's got Joan Bennett. And if anybody who knows me and knows Joan Bennett and knows what I'm referencing, Dark Shadows, baby.
Yep.
I absolutely love that. But you're totally right, bro. I mean, and it is the only movie that's been touched. And I do chalk it up a little bit to the fact that it's the movie that's become specifically synonymous with Dario. Depending on, of course, there's a subjectiveness to it. Suspiria might not be this person's favorite Dario movie. It might be this person's favorite. It might not be that person's. It might be that person's. But, it is probably the one that's closely thought of the most for
Yeah,
Dario,
yeah.
which is kind of the reason why I think they went that way. I've seen it. I have it. I don't hate it, but I think we could have gotten along without it.
Yeah.
I love. I'll be honest. I'm more stoked for the cast having a movie just like that on their resume, because I don't think it was a capital flop. It's definitely strange because, again, unfortunately, current modern times make certain things particularly tricky. But I can appreciate it. If I was an actor and there was a part in that movie being offered to me, I would absolutely say yes and do it. You know, even if I was a Dario fan like I am, even if I know Suspiria like I do, and being like, oh geez, they're gonna try this? Fuck it. I'm in. I gotta be a part of it. I gotta have something like that as a part of my resume. So I appreciate it for the cast, and I can appreciate it for the attempt. But do I think it needs to take up a spot in movie culture, cinematic history? Do I think it needs to be on my shelf? No, I don't. But considering that it was done, I'm not going to have a copy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a cool thing about the Suspiria too. Like I said, when we were talking about, with this being the first of a trilogy,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, especially in certain times, especially at this time, you didn't really necessarily get these like back to back trilogies, and that's what's crazy about this one, where you did have the two movies that were right back to back. And then, we'll talk about the third one, but the third one, eventually was so many years later that so many people thought that we would never get the full Mother of Tears trilogy. But yeah, it goes right into the second one, which is another huge favorite of mine, Inferno, because I'm a huge Dante's Inferno guy to begin with. And like I said, I like this one because it was it had that setting. It was it was set in New York, so it was more of like an American style film, even though it was predominantly mostly all Italian actors as well. But they use bits and parts of filming it in New York. And like I said, this one too I like this one as far as the Three Witches. This is probably my favorite of Three Witches because she was just so brutal and so freaking like so hot too, and like just the youngest. She's considered the youngest of the three mothers of the Mother Witches.
Right. She's considered the youngest, but she's also considered the meanest. Like,
Yeah.
it's just that just jealous, bitter, cruel little sister kind of thing,
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And again, it's interesting to the way that Dario did this as well, where it's like, okay, I've got the oldest, then I'm going to the youngest, then I'm eventually going to get to the middle child. It's just interesting to me. I find it kind of an interesting take as well, like we were talking about in the last segment, where it was like the way things are set up, the way you plan this out ahead of time. But again, he didn't go oldest, middle, youngest. He didn't go youngest, middle, oldest.
Ghouls and Fangs, Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, we've got John Waters, but what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And you know, we love it. We love the fact that, you know, they were going to bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans or maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you got to check it out because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.
Cool, Devil. I like the fact that you brought that up, and I think that's a really interesting thing, and something I found very particularly unique with Dario was when you've got something like the Mothers and a pre-planned like notion, like a concept and idea, you know, doesn't mean that he was never going to be able to do it, but you never really know based on how movies are going to react, whether they're going to flop or not. But yeah, dude, I loved the idea behind these Mothers over movies, but I find it very interesting and incredibly unique that he doesn't do them in order. He starts them off at the oldest, then he actually jumps to the youngest, and then when we get to it, we'll circle back into the middle child, which I always just found to be particularly interesting. He doesn't go, you know, oldest, middle, youngest, or youngest, middle, oldest. He doesn't keep it in order. He does this slightly jump around thing where, yeah, with 3 characters, it's not like he's super duper all over the board, but it's still not in chronological order based on like the birth of these quote unquote mothers and stuff like that, which I just found to be a very kind of interesting way for him to do it.
Yeah. It's pretty cool too, because it's you know, because you know, the time lapse between Inferno and then what would become the third movie of the Riches would be Mother of Tears movie. There's such a time gap that the actual witch that's in Mother of Tears is actually technically has a quick cameo in Inferno where she's watching the students and watching the one boy in the classroom. Eventually, you know, when they did finally film Mother of Tears, they had to use a different actress because that actress was no longer that. But the other cool thing about the Mother of Tears in Suspiria, which was the oldest of all the witches, is that apparently the rumor is that Dario found her, that she was one of the oldest prostitutes in Italy. And like apparently, I don't know if she was retired at the time now, but was like at one time like considered like Italy's like oldest prostitute. And that I thought that was kind of interesting that, you know, this like old witch in this movie was like, you know, just got done retiring, you know, being a prostitute. Now she's you know, the Mother of Tears and this crazy evil witch. I just thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, he just found her on the street and I guess like she looked cool and he was like talking to her about the part and she just came out and then said, hey man, I used to be a prostitute, and you know, for like 70-80 years.
Dude, that's so funny. It's strangely enough not the actress herself. I'm absolutely not implying that, nor is Devil, but just in the idea of a movie, it's funny. It gives me this flash a little bit of actually Meg Foster's character from Lords of Salem.
Yeah.
That kind of older, tenured, you know, motherly woman figure, that witchy figure, where, you know, of course, Meg Foster is also always very much known for her eyes. But even at that time, and even much later in her life, you know, where she's much older now, she was still incredibly, you know, comfortable with, you know, her body being portrayed in the way it was in that particular movie. And again, nudity is absolutely nothing lost on Rob Zombie whatsoever. But it just does kind of remind me a little bit of that for some reason, where again has nothing to do with Meg Foster, you know, the person outside of the acting realm. Just the idea of where this person was a real life prostitute that Dario found and turned out would work so well for this part, for this motherly role, where you just get somebody, again, who's very not only seasoned in her acting career, but just seasoned in life, and Meg Foster being comfortable in putting together that kind of character as well. I just think it's a very kind of interesting thing, and they both kind of trigger different parts of my horror mind.
Yeah, and and the other thing that I love about Inferno is the I don't know how you want to call it, the Catmageddon or whatever, with all the kitty cats and
Yeah.
the craziness of like you know, the violence of like the cats finally getting their turn, which usually, like, you know, in these Italian horror films, it's for, you know, a lot of times animals usually don't survive very well in the genre, and this was kind of like the shoe on the other foot, where the cats were taking their turn to take down their victims.
Right. And it's really interesting. It's a very interesting like closure for this movie, and it's interesting as well because again, like we spoke earlier about kind of that twist, those turns, that kind of interesting ways to end a movie that for me when it came to Dario always felt very Hitchcockian and stuff like that, which I always thought was interesting. It is very interesting to see movies that, you know, of course are still based around twists, turns, twisted thoughts and blood and red paint, like we were talking about, and then having just, you know, an orgy of kittens, you know, just happy fluff and fur babies closing out this horror movie.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. You know, like I said, Dario's not afraid to, you know, push the boundaries and push the envelopes, and that kind of goes into the segue of him, like, you know, art imitating life and life imitating art and stuff like that. Where the next movie that he does, Tenebra, was like loosely based off of an experience that he had with a stalker stalking him, and like he basically just kind of took that idea of a stalker and, you know, kind of made it a little bit different, obviously, you know, for the movie aspect and stuff like that. But yeah, like, yeah, and then like we said, it goes into Tenebra, and then kind of like he brings back that, you know, that giallo kind of feel to it, where the last couple of movies he's done are just mainly like the strictly horror aspect with the supernatural, where Tenebra kind of brings back that sort of like crime noir, and it's pretty cool too because, you know, the main guy who is in this is John Saxon, who everybody knows as, you know, the dad of Heather Langenkamp, Nancy's in Nightmare on Elm Street.
For sure. And I think, and I always found that to be really interesting. And of course, with seasoned actors, actresses, the more movies they do, the more paths they cross and stuff like that. But it's cool, I think, to have like John Saxon be basically the first like horror actor that, again, I use this phrase a lot, the common populace, but like the first like horror actor that the common and the general horror populace would recognize in a Dario Argento film. You know, not that, you know, other, you know, foreign horror fans wouldn't, of course, be familiar with, you know, other actors and actresses and stuff like that. Like also, you know, somebody like me when we were talking about Joan Bennett in one of our previous segments. Of course, there's going to be people you'll recognize or people you might already be a fan of. But just when it comes to somebody who becomes a staple of either a horror series or just horror movies, I thought it was really cool to watch John Saxon appear. Where I was actually watching Tenebra for the first time when I was setting up for this episode, and I was like, "That's John Saxon. That's awesome." Just for him to kind of be that first, guy that we know from the consistent, well-known horror movies to appear in a Dario film.
Yeah, but the funny thing about it though is watching it now, and you go into the John Saxon being in that movie, but technically he would have been in this movie before he would have been in Freddy Krueger, because Tenebra came out in 1982, and I believe the first Freddy came out in like 85 or 86 or 80 something, somewhere in the 80s. I don't remember exactly the date of when the first Freddy Krueger came out. I think it might have been 84. 84 or 85, but anyway, like I said, this movie would have been been before he was in Freddy Krueger. But like I said, most people probably wouldn't have seen this movie until later on. So like you said, your point would have been like, yeah, they would have watched Tenebra, and then they would have been like, hey, isn't that the dad from Freddy Krueger? Even though, like I said, technically he was in this movie before he was in Freddy Krueger. But like I said, I love it. I like it. And then again, the cool thing about this movie that I found kind of interesting when I was looking into my information for this, is obviously it's another Dario movie. He's gonna use Goblin music. We already knew that. Cool thing about it is, like, some of the music that was actually made for Goblin, that made for this movie, was actually unused music from Dawn of the Dead that they didn't actually use in the movie, that I guess they wrote some stuff for it and it just never put it in the film. And now they just like, Dario's like, well, shit, that sounds cool. You sure it wasn't in one of the movies? Like, no, we didn't use it. He's like, fuck it, put it in my movie then.
Oh, that's rad. Yeah, no, that's super duper cool. And yeah, I looked it up on the fly. It was 1984 for Elm Street. So yeah, 2 years before. But no, that's actually super cool. I love that, because honestly, when taking a moment to talk again a little bit just about music, the one thing I think is great is there's a lot of these companies like Waxworks, and there's another one, I forget their name off the top of my head, but there's a couple of companies that have become very dedicated to putting out these great classic horror movies as like soundtracks. Like, I know Waxworks works very closely with Rob Zombie. I have a bunch of them already. With Rob either redoing soundtracks of movies he loved, like White Zombie, like Carnival of Souls, and like Spider Baby, but then also doing stuff like House of a Thousand Corpses, releasing House of a Thousand Corpses. I've also got the Lords of Salem one as well. But they've also done soundtracks for stuff like Dawn of the Dead, like Dementia 13, and other stuff like that. So I think that's actually really, really cool. And like I said, there's another company that I forget that they're doing that also. So where it does seem like there's this vinyl resurgence that's going on, and where I don't fully look at it as a vinyl resurgence as far as vinyl like it was in the 80s and 70s being a dominant way to listen to your music. I do love this resurgence for the ability to collect or even listen if you enjoy listening to vinyl. Like, you have a player, I have a player, like, that kind of stuff. I love that. And again, vinyl in general just makes for just great art and stuff like that. If you're like me, who likes to hang it and stuff like that, I always think vinyl is great when it comes to that. But yeah, so I think that's actually really cool, where, yeah, Goblin obviously has, established themselves, like we spoke earlier, as, Dario's equivalent to Danny Elfman and Tim Burton. I think that's kind of cool. They're like, well, we have this music, we pitched it here, they didn't hate it, but didn't feel it fit, and it's unused. And yeah, like you said, for Dario to be like, oh, right here, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing that I read about, which everybody who knows me knows I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan, and apparently Quentin Tarantino's favorite kills in like almost every movie he's ever seen is in Tenebra, when Jane gets the axe, and like, that scene is it's such an iconic kill. It's such an awesome kill. And I'm like, when I read about that and seen like the interviews with it, I'm like, that tracks. I mean, I could see Quentin being like, out of all the Dario kills, Which I don't know, man. I mean, that one's pretty cool. I mean, there's some other gnarly ones that I think, but I think it's kind of cool that he kind of picked, this movie and that kill, because like I said, Tenebra is not one of those ones that's a huge, on the list of the Dario movies. Even though, like I said, even though it is part of the Mother of Witches, the Mother of Tears trilogy, but like I said, a lot of people, if you didn't know that this was a trilogy movie, people probably wouldn't watch this one nearly as much. And then like I said, with this film and stuff like that, it goes on to, which is probably almost, I would say, probably one of my favorite ones, if not, which is Phenomena, which was called AKA Creepers.
Yeah.
And the main reason why I loved it was, of course, my girl's in it. Obviously, Jennifer Connelly. Even though at that time when she was underage, but so was I when this movie came out. So therefore, it was good. Like I said, it was right at that time when she was just getting known, right before like the Labyrinth and stuff like that. So she hadn't had that. Hadn't had Labyrinth come out, but of course, like everybody now knows Jennifer Connelly as this huge, female movie star. But I love the fact that she kind of started off her career doing this weird Dario Argento movie. And I say weird in a good way because it is a weird movie. It's, especially her character. Her character is very odd and very just kind of just weird and spooky and ooky and kooky and likes bugs. Like, what girl is like that big, and especially a girl who looks as pretty as Jennifer Connelly does, is into sticky, icky, crazy, weird looking bugs.
Right. And it's funny too because there's a part of me that literally is imagining the Fangs watching us right now going while you were leading into that segment, oh man, he's totally about to get back on there talking about Aja again. We know it. And then bam, Jennifer Connelly.
Yeah. We haven't quite got on that Aja train. She's coming soon, but yeah, once once
Coming
once
to a
once
theater near you.
yeah, once Aja gets on the picture, yeah, I completely forget about Jennifer Connelly. But right now, it's Jennifer Connelly time.
No, absolutely. But I mean, she's also, I mean, not only is it awesome, especially at a young age, landing a Dario film role, but her career has been really awesome. I mean, of course, she's this big star, amazing roles and stuff like that. But even stuff for like us, the stuff that we really like, the weird and the kind of unique is, movies like, Requiem for a Dream, which I love. And I know you really like that movie. And I'm a Jared Leto guy. And I just think that movie is just in general, I think it's fantastic. But then you and I, not that long ago, we went out with the ladies and we went over to the Jim Henson exhibit that they popped into Baltimore. And we got to see a little bit of Jennifer Connelly, garb in that exhibit because she was in Labyrinth.
Yeah, it was really cool to see the dress and like the attire that they wore for that. Because like I said, I mean that's probably as far as Jennifer Connelly, that's probably my favorite movie that she's ever been in. Maybe Career Opportunities, but Career Opportunities is only because the 2 or 3 minutes that she's riding a horse, and that's for a completely different reason. and
Yep.
she's of age in that movie, so I can talk about her like that.
100%. But also, we just came off a segment talking about John Saxon. We're talking currently about Jennifer Connelly and the amazing career she's had and the great roles that she's had. But I mean, dude, one of the late great icons who's not with us anymore, who was solidly established in another film series, but he too is an alumni of Dario Argento, and that's the great Donald Pleasance.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's cool about this one too, because like I said, you see that and you see Jennifer Connelly. Like I said, especially if you go back and watch these movies now versus when they came out, because like I said, when this movie came out, she was pretty much like an unknown. Donald Pleasance had been known, but obviously because Halloween came out in in the late 70s. So of course, but that's what everybody else is. It's cool. It's cool to see him in this kind of like different role versus the Dr. Loomis role.
Yes, which is super duper cool. I mean, and it's great seeing those guys that we really like, that we may even just interpret specifically with a certain character or a certain role, but it's great to see them in other things. Sometimes they branch off and it's just a one-off, and then other times it's a whole another thing. Like so many people knowing Kane Hodder for Jason, but having him stem off where at the time he's this new character in Victor Crowley, but now it's turned into this whole series of 4 movies, of which he is 100% synonymous with this role, as he's been the only person to play the character, versus Jason has had a few other people behind the mask. But I definitely think it's cool in general where you get to see these people that you're quite fond of, even for specific roles, just playing something else, playing something a little bit different. And I think that's super duper cool. And I mean, Donald's so great, so fantastic. Definitely somebody who I would have loved to have met, but unfortunately didn't really get the chance to that. But like, at the same time, you were talking about how Quentin Tarantino loved the axe kill of Tenebra. Well, this movie itself happens to be one of Dario's particular favorites, which I found to be really, really cool, because it's not uncommon, of course, for directors to have a favorite. But I always find it really interesting when a director with a really established history of greatness has a favorite, and it's rarely ever one of what you would say is the Mount Rushmore. You know what I mean? Like we could probably do a Mount Rushmore of Dario movies, just like we could do one for Stephen King, we could do one for Clive Barker, we could do one for all these people. Where you look at those are the movies that he's gotta love, this one or that one. Dude, I think it's so cool, Devil, when they like a movie that's like what you might call a second tier. Not because it's bad, but just because it's not considered one of the elite.
Yeah. And like the crazy thing about this too, we've been talking about with the Dario's career so far, and with him being so heavenly with the Goblin soundtrack and stuff like that. I like how this movie kind of went a little bit different way. He actually used a lot of, metal bands at that time that were really, really huge. Iron Maiden and Motorhead are like hardcore in this movie, and it's kind of interesting because this movie has it has that 80s hair metal, heavy metal feel to it, where like the other films always had that kind of more creepy, spooky, kind of eerily soundtrack, very synth and very keyboard stuff. Where now this movie is very kind of like his version of rock and roll. You know what I mean? It's got a lot of fast paced music that kind of goes with the movie.
That absolutely, and that movie overall, it's super cool, it's super fun, and I love the fact that Dario holds that so close to his heart. But speaking of hearts, move over, Jennifer, because we're going to transition to another country, so to speak. But let's talk a little bit about the Demons movies.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, technically, if people want to go and look, you look at the Demons 1 and 2 movie. Technically, that's first Asia Argento movie that she was in. I don't really, I mean, yes, you can consider it. I mean, I love the Demon movies. I like them. They're like that throwback to the old school, like Fulci and Mario Brava kind of old school kind of zombie feels to it. Yeah, and with Dario, I know he wrote the screenplay for part 2. So yeah, even though, like I said, even though this is Aja's first on camera acting job, it's not until another 2 movies down from Dario's list that we get the official Aja and Dario Argento combat. But again, I love demons. I love demons too. And like I said, to me personally, Demons 1 I think is a better movie, but I'll put Demons 2 over top of it just because of Aja Argento's debut.
No, absolutely. And this was really for you because I couldn't help myself because I love the demon movies too. They're just fun. They're kooky. They're awesome. And yeah, there's ties to Dario, but they're really more of just a tentative intermission for a moment as we talk about Aja's debut technically, of which we will get into that officially in a little bit. But as we spoke a little bit about, again, what people would consider the Mount Rushmore of Dario, this movie would definitely be on the majority of the people's lists as a movie that is thought of very quickly with Dario, very much like Suspiria, and that's opera.
Yeah, I would put this, I mean, like I said, as far as like, your favorites and stuff like that, that could be kind of subjective, but as far as like movies that more people would probably know of Dario's work, Suspiria and opera. Opera is probably one of the biggest ones that everybody knows, mainly because that was when we got introduced to what we've been talking about for a while, the eyeball torture and the start of these gruesome kills that kind of make you go, ooh, and go and close your eyes and stuff like that, where the kills before they were always really cool. Like I said, with the stabbing and the blood and like the redness of it and the paint and stuff like that. But most of those kills were kind of like, okay, cool, you got stabbed in the gut, you got stabbed in the neck, okay, whatever. He started getting into what I would call the more torturous, more graphic of that with opera, because like I said, everybody, I mean, just the scene alone when the main girl is getting this, the killer is in this movie is basically making her watch these people get killed, and the way to keep her from watching it is he's putting these needles in her eyes so that if she blinks she's gonna stab herself in the eye every time. So you got to basically keep your eye open. And yeah, that's one of the coolest, it's kind of like an introduction to maybe like the saw traps or something like that, where it was something like that, where it kept, you had to endure, some pain or get a lot more pain. So I love that, where that, and that image, like I said, even especially because of the poster where you have the girl and she's got like she's got the tied around her head, very kind of Christ-like, but then with the things which kind of looks like these a little bit, but I love the needles in your eye.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's also very like A Clockwork Orange, but much more like morbid. Where of course Alex is being held over because that's the treatment that he's getting to see these violent crimes, to teach him that this is bad stuff and you don't want to do this kind of stuff, versus this, which is basically the same stuff. It's like, yeah, we're gonna show you a bunch of violent shit, but in Alex's case, he can try to close his eyes, he simply can't. In Opera's case, you can close your eyes, but you're going to cause a lot of damage to them if you do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Get my point?
Yep. And that's the cool thing about this too. The thing that, they always tell you in movies is that don't work with animal and children because apparently they're the worst people or worst things to deal with in movies. So Dario took that to the extreme in this movie. It's very, very Shakespearean, very opera, like they're trying to get that atmosphere, and there are crows throughout this whole entire movie. And Dario used legitimately real crows, and it was like I heard like anywhere between like 100 to 150 of them, and apparently didn't wrangle all of them, so some just disappeared and some went in people's houses, and the neighborhood was basically plagued with these crows because they couldn't wrangle them all together, which I thought was kind kind of cool. That'd be kind of interesting. All of a sudden, you're just driving around in your hometown, and all of a sudden, you just see like a murder of crows, as they call it.
Yes. A murder. A group of crows is called a murder. It's just one of my favorite Homer lines from The Simpsons. I can't help myself. I love that line. Because it's also from one of the greatest Simpsons episodes, in my opinion, which is when Homer deals with weed. But anyway, let's not get off track. We'll save, maybe we'll do a Treehouse of Horror somewhere in the future, just to have a little bit of fun. But this is Dario's time. Now, the other thing that I also found to be actually really interesting, and I didn't really, I mean, I've seen that movie a lot anyway, but I didn't really dig on it when it came to the notes. So I was enjoying, shooting back some of our notes with what you sent me, and was the fact that it was William McNamara's debut, which I didn't really realize. And then when I kind of saw it, I kind of went back and I kind of looked up the cast, and I was like, holy shit. So again, just another new actor that is kind of getting discovered by Dario Argento.
Yeah, and a V&D, Vampire and Devil alumni,
Yeah.
in the greatest Eastern horror movie ever made, Rotten Tales.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool because, like I said, it'd been a while since I've seen opera, and I went back and watched it. I'm like, hey, isn't that dude from Rotten Tales and Copycat? I'm like looking up. I'm like, oh shit, it was him, and then I realized it was actually his debut. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, so I was like, that's two cool actors that I've I've always liked in all their movies. Like with Jennifer adding to it, and then with him, I'm like, that's kind of a cool thing, especially like as an actor. You know what I mean? Just to be able to say like, your first movie was, with this director, or my first movie was that director, especially if these directors are like ones like Dario, who is just considered a master. It's always cool to like be like, yeah, well, my first director was this guy, and you're like, well, yeah, I worked with Dario.
Hold my beer.
You're like, oh shit.
It's just a definite hold my beer moment.
Yep. And I got freaking a knife right through the mouth.
Exactly. Yep. As Rotten Tail holds the distinction of being right up there on our hanging tree of woe, as currently the lowest ranked movie we've ever done on our show. But yep, absolutely. We talk about pins to the eyes, but who doesn't love a good knife to the mouth?
Yeah, exactly. And like I thought it was cool too. It was like another interesting fact that I didn't know about this movie was that the ending was actually somewhat inspired by Red Dragon book, which if things would know, the Red Dragon book is the book that was made about Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. Which I think is just like super duper cool, and also just very interesting as well, because I mean, Red Dragon's its own thing, Hannibal Lecter's its own thing, and it's not uncommon for there to be similarities in, and not just the horror genre, but just other genres with movies that have like similarities and stuff like that. But yeah, I do find that to be kind of like interesting, where you've got an inspiration for a different telling from the same book that then went on to assist in the setup of one of the biggest, I don't want to go so much as to say like movie franchises, but one of the most legendary characters over a series of movies, of course, in Anthony Hopkins, with not only, starting off with Manhunter, which a lot of people forget about, but I mean, Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and then I loved the more recent movies like Hannibal Rising. I personally thought that movie was great.
Yeah. And then with the continuing on with the Dario experience, now we can move Dario over just a little bit. I mean, we're gonna still keep him in frame because it's obviously about him, but we're gonna talk about my favorite Argento. Maybe, I don't know. That's a toss up. I'd have to choose between which Argento I like better. I would probably go with Aja, maybe a smidgen, but then it goes into Trauma, which is the first movie, which I consider the first movie of Asia Argento, because it's the first movie with her working with her father. And it's movie is called Trauma, and it kind of brings a lot of trauma in this movie. I don't want to give any huge spoilers or, go into depth with it, but Aja does have a book that she talks about all this crazy shit that she went through working with her father, especially on this movie. I mean, she was 16 when this movie was filmed. I think she was 18 by the time the movie came out, but she's got a full frontal nudity. And I know it's probably not a PC for me to say, and probably underage boobs, but Jesus, man, for underage boobage, Aja was pretty nice. But like I said, it's kind of, and not even just being a girl in these films, doing nudity at a young age. There's been a lot of young girls. We can talk about what the hell, the Kevin Spacey one with the girls.
Yeah, American Beauty.
American Beauty, with Muna Sorvino and those guys when they were underage and a little bit of nudity. So there's always been
with
nudity. Thor Birch, yeah, there's always been nudity in and especially in movies or horror movies and stuff like that, with women who may not have been of age. But then a lot of time it really depends on the time period. You gotta realize this was filmed in Italy, so that probably the laws of what can be shown and what can't be shown are different. The weirdness that I think about it is that most of these aren't being directed by their father, which just kind of is kind of odd that you're especially in this movie too, because not only is you see the nudity, she's a very traumatized. But this movie's very post-traumatic stress disorder kind of stuff, and she's very sexual throughout this whole entire movie, which is just kind of odd. And she, like I said, if you want to get into it, read her book where she talks a lot about it. I mean, she still loves her father. She's obviously worked with her father many, many, many times. But yeah, this movie is traumatizing, which is, like I said, it's kind of ironic that this movie is called Trauma, and it did cause a lot of trauma, within her life.
Yeah, because it is one of those things where, like, there is a part of me that kind of wants to play vampire's advocate, where it's like, if you're doing something like that at a young age, having your father as the director where he is present can potentially aid in the prevention of bad things happening to a young actress, let alone his daughter, doing scenes like this in the nature of which he did them. However, again, at the same time, there is a different line to that, where, again, it is something being so young, still doing these, and it's not so much about the movie itself. It's about, well, we can appreciate you having your daughter, backing your daughter, wanting to add to her career, to her, filmography. But is it really wise to cast your daughter in this particular role, as opposed to maybe somewhere else in the movie where she still gets the credit and the filmography, but doesn't quite have those experiences? Again, you and I were around, but we weren't in the room for those discussions. So, we won't speculate on what may or may not have been said or what's swaying it had to have been done, because I'll be honest, I can't help but wonder a little bit what Aja's mom may or may not have said when it came to that situation. I'd be honestly a little curious if we were ever to get the opportunity to talk to Aja's mom, would be where her head was for that particular casting, knowing what the movie was all about. Just kind of interesting when it comes to those situations. So it is definitely a little back and forth. But again, it is common knowledge that it's got negative to it, unfortunately. It's got negative connotations, just because of stress, trauma that it caused. And again, we won't go into the details. it's also not our job to like, poke, accuse, or like, do conspiracy theories and stuff. That's, that's not what this show is about. But go out if you're curious, if you're intrigued or interested in what Devil and I are saying, go out and read her book. Because also, Aja is a fantastic actress, even outside the horror genre. The role that she played in Triple X, I thought was great. It was fun. It was interesting. And she's a very, very excellent actress. But that's definitely a hell of a way to really break into the business, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% sure, but I'm not. Maybe 99.9%. You might be able to look on your phone real quick, but I'm pretty sure that her mother passed away a few years ago.
Oh yeah, no, I meant it like if we were able to talk to her.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I'm pretty sure she died like a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's just what I meant, was like, if we were to have the opportunity, that would just have been a very interesting segment. Just a curiosity amongst fans of and just free will thinkers of how that conversation would have gone or did gone if Mrs. Argento was still with us today.
Yeah.
That's just what I mean by, yeah, I knew that she had left us. I just meant it more like if the opportunity were to be a possibility because she was with us, that would have been interesting.
Yeah. And another cool thing I like about this movie is like it's Dario's first American production. So most of his films had been filmed over in Italy, Romania, a lot of Eastern European, areas and stuff like that. So this is like the first time, he had a lot of American workers on here, grips and directors and VPs and stuff like that. And with that, we got two good actors in this movie that I love, with Piper Laurie, which everybody knows who Piper Laurie is and stuff like that. With no my hangers, and obviously, fans of the horror genre, with Chucky, you get Brad Dourif, who not only was Charles Lee Ray, but still continually goes on to doing the voice of Chucky in his.
No, 100%. And that's the one thing that's also really interesting. I'm only gonna to backtrack to our previous segment for a split second as to make this point, because we don't want to obviously just keep beating that into the ground. But that's the one thing that's also very interesting about this being his first, American production, where you and I talked before about, the laws in Italy, the laws in Europe might be laxer, different, that kind of stuff. That stuff probably doesn't happen nowadays. But in general, I find that to be just an interesting situation as well, because, again, when it comes to the States, there are also differences in child labor laws and stuff like that. So while this is still back in the early 90s, it's just kind of, it's interesting that a movie like this actually takes place in the States, where you think something that does deliver a lot of bang would be another European movie, and it's not. But yeah, no, I mean, Piper's in this movie, which is fantastic, and Brad's in this movie, and as kind of like our previous segment, where it's like it's cool to see people who you associate with something else heavily, to see them in something else. So that's another example of just a really cool branch out of an established actor in one place showing up somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's just like I said, it's such a cool like I said, the whole movie in general is just like a really cool storyline, and just with her just running around, with Aja running around and stuff like that, and just the craziness of her, like and you can even for like this being what would be technically her second movie, but this would be her first movie as like a starring main role. You know what I mean? You would think that she would have been a seasoned actress at the time that she was doing this movie, just because the fact that how well she works with the camera, how well she acts. I mean, obviously you have the the thick Italian accent that she has, but like I said, other than that, like I said, I just love the the craziness of this movie, as far as like I said, is it on there as the a top Dario movie? Maybe not as much, but like I said, I just like it just because it is a traumatic movie as far as like dealing with trauma and dealing with that with stress and dealing with parents that may do stuff bad to you or do this kind of stuff, so that that post-traumatic stress disorder. I think it was, like I said, I think it was just very well done, especially for a movie in the 90s. Like I said, there's obviously other little things in the movie that might be a little tabooish, but I still think that they touched on that mental health pretty good.
I agree. No, I definitely think they did, and it's a tough. They did such a good job, in my opinion, too, at a time where we're so much more on that now. Like it's a real talked about topic nowadays. Mental health is, talked about at every corner store. You know, that was absolutely stuff that wasn't discussed back then. So I think that's very, very cool and definitely ballsy to a certain degree to take a stab at a time of something that's not really being spoken of very much, and doing, like you said, a really quality job harnessing it and getting the point across.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then you jumping into more Dario movies. It goes into probably one of my favorite sort of movies, especially for a movie that's being remade. I love, and we'll talk about, we obviously did a review of Dario doing the Dracula movie, but before he did Dracula, he remade Phantom of the Opera, which I love. And it has one of my favorite actors that unfortunately is no longer with us anymore, and Julian Sands as the Warlock. I loved his version of this Phantom of the Opera, because most Phantom of the Operas are disfigured and stuff like that, where Julian Sands he's gorgeous in this movie.
Yeah,
He's just living in a basement with rats.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I love Julian Sands. I'm a huge Warlock fan. I just think those movies are so great. And but yeah, no, I think it's cool. I mean, and Phantom of the Opera is, let's be honest, it's gotten around. It's got that play, that opera has that film that's got legs, dude.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, all the way back to Lon Chaney, where it begins, and even Robert Englund dipped its toe in the Phantom of the Opera. But I like the way you put it, because I think it's a proper way to put it out there, where when you get a character, regardless of gender, that has a certain amount of beauty in the presentation of the role, it's worth acknowledging on that. Where again, there's beauty in what Lon Chaney did in Phantom of the Opera. But again, that movie was based still more on the hideous nature of the Phantom. Then you get into Robert Englund, where Robert isn't a bad-looking guy, but I wouldn't go so far as to call the man overly handsome, And again, still very quality in the way that he did his movie, which again was designed to definitely be more of that darker style. Julian is the first one to really tackle that role from a beauty aspect, and I just loved the execution of it. Again, he has a suaveness about him, a poshness to him. I mean, when you watch Warlock, yeah, it's got bloody kills, and he was taking people out in incredibly gruesome ways. But he himself, it was like getting killed by a runway model. He's just a very well put together man in these roles that he does. And he also really kind of he was kind of the first of the continuation where they started using beauty as a factor. And I know there are people that are probably going to be watching this right now, and they're going to be like, Dev, like, the Phantom of the Opera is, of course, it's all based around beauty. Well, of course it is, because you've got the female love interest. That's a very important part. But I'm talking about just specifically when it comes to the Phantom itself, which then also led to probably the most overall well-received and I guess blockbuster of the Phantom of the Operas, which was a while back, where the Phantom was actually played by Gerard Butler, who people and went on to know from, King Leonidas in 300, where of course he's a good-looking guy, but much more muscular, but has also again that European flair to him because he's not from America, which I thought was also very, very cool. But Julian really paved the way in that shared beauty when it came to that movie, as opposed to that Beauty and the Beast kind of aspect.
Yeah, and like you said, when you're doing these Dario movies and everybody keeps on talking about Dario being a master, he's a master of horror, he's a master of this, he's a master of that. I love that when we talk about these directors and these, especially at a time back then when we were talking about these guys being masters and who you like as a horror director, this guy or that guy. And then, lo and behold, a series comes out called Masters of Horror, which basically kind of goes to, let's give some of these horror directors and these horror writers, a little hour slot where they can shine. And Dario, in season 1 and season 2 got to do one of the coolest ones. I mean, and the first season was one called Jennifer, which is still really fucked up to watch when I watch this thing, especially talking about beauty and stuff like that, where her character has got probably one of the best looking bodies in the entire world. Face is just mangled up. I mean, all jacked up, but yet these guys they want to get some loving from Jennifer, and she's got an insatiable sex drive and an insatiable hunger.
Yeah. And it's crazy with that. I mean, I loved this series. I was always kind of sad that it only lasted for 2 seasons. I was like, I really wanted this to be like a much more like powerful thing. But no, I think that movie's really, really cool. I like the idea of vulnerability in this movie mixed with just kind of rage, because again, you've got this beautiful person who, fell out of the ugly tree and hit every branch down. But then it's like, well, how do I want to put this? Fuck it. That the guys are just down to rock with a bag over her head kind of a thing, which I just find very interesting. It's also that stereotypic thing of this is all that guys think about and stuff like that. And, hey, turn out the lights. Hey, dude, even Steel Panther put that in one of their songs. But it bridges into how then Jennifer turns it around on these people. Very kind of I spit on your grave.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, in the beginning of this episode, you see Jennifer almost being killed by this guy, and everybody's trying to stop her, and this cop, stops her from being killed. And then eventually, she's got no place to go. He brings her in. She works her way. And of course, kind of like those, those old stories, those old movies, or the resurgence of it with Keanu Reeves, like Knock Knock, like what you should do and what men don't do. It's kind of like this, where most men should just bring her in, don't do anything, especially because he's a married man and stuff like that. But yet, what does he do? He's got a boner, and she takes advantage of that, and basically drives them crazy with this desire for her, which eventually turns into where at the end of this episode he becomes the guy that he killed in the beginning. And somebody kills him, and starts the cycle over again, and you see that that men are always going to be pigs instead of being gentlemen. But the only problem with this whole entire episode that I even wrote on our notes is, okay, you're gonna kill this bitch, right? You're gonna do her. You're secluded in the middle of the woods in a cabin. Why are you dragging her out in the middle of the other woods while some deer hunter can see her and stop her and shoot you and kill you? I would have just killed Jennifer in the confinements of my cabin, and nobody would have known, and he would have survived. That was his downfall. You're gonna kill somebody. Why do you? Like I said, you want to do it in a secluded place, but you're in a secluded place already, so there's no reason to drag her around. It just makes it for more people to come in and see. You're gonna have a deer hunter, and that's what happened. Dumbass
Yeah,
guy.
and that was the thing. I never really understood that like myself either. I was always kind of like, well, I mean, I get it. I was like, it makes sense to me, but I don't really get the point of like it. Honestly, it reminds me so much of why the villains in comic books always get foiled. They make fun of it in the Incredibles when they're talking about monologuing, and I've just
Yeah.
always it's kind of like that where, yeah, dude, it's like, look, if you're gonna commit this act, you're very, for lack of a better term, protected in the area. You can just execute it now, and then you can just be about your way. But no, because you want to get cute and you want to go find the perfect spot or whatever the fuck is going through some of these people's minds, is when it's kind of like, all right, now you see, now you see that you fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. But let's
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
but let's keep it in the Masters of Horror, and we'll move it on to a nice comfortable coat
Yeah.
as we talk about pelts and another late great, oh, my beloved Eddie, but the late great Meatloaf is in this,
Yep.
and man, do I love this movie. This just fucked up doctor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's got, like I said, it's got Meatloaf, and it's got John Saxon again in another Dario Argento, thing. So it's like, yeah, he's like, hey man, I'm gonna bring this guy back. But yeah, I love, I'm a huge Meatloaf fan. I love him in all his movies. This is one of the craziest roles I think he's played, sort of, which is really weird to say because of some of the roles he's played have been way out there. But yeah, it's basically about a guy who's a trapper who traps the animals for their furs, and it's kind of like a before everybody goes, oh, that's so horrible and you shouldn't hurt the animals. Well, watch the episode, because yeah, that's pretty much what the basically of the gist of this story is basically kind of like, you reap what you sow, and this guy finds these awesome, you know these fur coats, not fur coats, but these furs on these creatures, and they're magical, and they look amazing, and they feel amazing, but yet there's a downfall to it, because you basically you kind of sell your soul to the devil for these things, because these pelts are gonna they're gonna come back and get you for killing their beloved animals that they were on.
Yeah. And I mean, I loved, and I loved the portrayal of like Meatloaf's character in this too. Also with that, that touch of madness, which, was part of the reap what you sow, as, as the tables get flipped on him in this kind of, well, an eye for an eye, a pelt for a pelt, skin for a skin, which I was
Yeah, yeah.
which I was just thought was super cool about the way they did that. Because, Meatloaf's, I love his character acting. Of course, we're Rocky Horror people, and for me, he's always going to be Eddie. But even the Bob character in Fight Club, I've always found Meatloaf's choice of roles to just be very, very interesting as basically a guy with just no fucks to give.
Yeah, which is really funny, because you see him now, and not now, but obviously
Yeah.
because he's passed away. But these roles that he did, that he's kind of like said, "I'll fuck it, I'll do whatever," these crazy ass roles and stuff like that. It's kind of funny because when as a quick little side note with him doing Rocky Horror, he didn't want to do Rocky Horror. You know, they brought him over in the production in England and walked him. His agent walked him into the place, and he saw Tim Curry and Drag, and was like, "Fuck this," and ran across the street because he thought something like this would hurt his career, because obviously he was a huge musician, and he didn't want to be associated with something that was, what would be considered, at the time, queer and stuff like that, with all this kind of stuff like that, which Rocky Horror, obviously is. It's a huge LGBTQ, anthem movie and stuff like that. And like I said, and eventually, they got him back in. It's like, no, man, pay attention, listen to it, watch it. You'll love it. And yeah, he fell in love with it. And, obviously we got Eddie and stuff like that, which, like I said, even in this movie and stuff like that too, the whole obsession of this whole entire movie was, him in love with this stripper, and he wants to spend all this money, and he wants to give her all these lavishing things, and he's gonna give her this fur coat, and she's like, fuck yeah, this guy's gonna, like, basically a sugar daddy and stuff like that. And you would think, okay, yeah, some guy's gonna go through all this craziness, and eye as in, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I honestly didn't think that the stripper was all that. She was
Yeah.
to basically get killed over, which eventually he ends up getting killed in the episode. Yeah, I'm like, yeah. I mean, maybe, but like I said, maybe, Meatloaf liked him some of that.
Maybe, maybe he might have done it all for the nookie there, Devil.
Yeah, he would have done anything for love, and he would have done that too.
Absolutely.
Because apparently he did that, and he shouldn't have done that. See, that's the point of the song.
Exactly.
Do anything for love, but I won't do that, because he knows if I do that, some bad shit's gonna happen. And apparently he didn't heed his own words. He didn't listen to his own words, and he did that, and he killed a bunch of magical creatures that have magical fur, and yeah, they fucked him up for it.
Oh yeah, that they did. And as we leave Masters of Horror, we get to circle back around. We get to go back a little bit in time, but we get to cue up the triangle we've been hinting at for a while. Devil, my friend, why don't you bring us into Mother of Tears?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we said that the Tenebra was in 1980. We're just going to go with that for right now. So let's just say it's 1980 when that came out. Obviously, this is the second in the trilogy. It'd been, by the time Mother of Tears comes out in 2007, that would have been 27 years, and we figured we were never going to get this trilogy that was like, okay, what's this trilogy that you've been talking about? Usually, especially because, like I said, that we did that first one, and then a year later did the second trilogy, and then 27 years later decides to do the third trilogy in Mother of Tears.
Yep, absolutely. And we talked about it. We talked about it earlier, but it's also Daria's last movie.
Yeah.
And not last movie because of that reason so quickly, but just because we had touched on it in a previous segment. But yeah, it was Daria's last film that she did before retiring, before passing. But it was so cool to finally have this movie come out. And it's kind of one of those things where, like, Dario was doing so much great stuff and continues to, but was doing so much great stuff that it leads to, like, were we ever going to get it? You couldn't help but wonder. But I was beginning to feel we weren't really going to need it. It got to a point where I was happy that we got it, though, because just having 2 out of 3 when you knew there was 3 is the reason I was really glad that he was finally able to get it done. Because it's one thing for a person's career to just go in a certain direction or just be super busy or doing this or doing that or being in demand, that it just never happens. There's history of that. But it is kind of cool because, again, going back to when we were originally talking about it, it's interesting to commit to characters that you want to bridge over a series, since you don't really know how it might play out. And for a little while, bro, it was looking like that might actually be a thing, and we just might not get to talk about the most beautiful of the mothers.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I like this one too. It kind of goes back to the roots of Dario, where the first mother, there was, the first mother in the movie was from Romania, and then obviously with the second mother being from New York, and then this one she was back in Rome, which brought back into that at him back into Italy and filming back in Italy. And like I said, like I said, I like the actress that they did have in Tenebra for the Mother of Tears. But I'm kind of glad that it maybe taken that many years to do it, because the woman that they got, the actress that they got for the Mother of Tears in this movie is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, like I said, not only is she like evil and the witch, but yeah, she's just a gorgeous actress to begin with too. So it played so well on this movie.
Absolutely, man, for sure. And I was just super duper stoked to finally get this one done, and again, in typical twisted, effed up Argento fashion, a baby went for a flight and landed with a splash.
Yeah. Throwing it, which is crazy because this movie was made in 2007, and even saying that this movie from 2007, which is what 17 years ago or stuff like that, that the things that you are allowed to do even then you would never get away with doing now. And yeah, throwing a baby into a river is definitely, I don't think that you would probably be able to get away with that in the PC world anymore, even though it's not a real baby. It's just an actor. He was a very well actor, I mean, that kid has been, was an Olympic swimmer. Just because he's a baby doesn't mean you can't throw him in a river. Like, geez, man.
Yeah, seriously. It's like, oh, geez, shucks, it's just a baby killing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, definitely.
That's where all my babies are at.
Right. But then even as we've discussed it before, even as we're getting into these more delicate PC times and stuff like that, again, when you do have somebody who's consistently known to push the envelope, and this is what his style of movies are, you kind of have to start taking that stuff with a grain of salt, where you just have to be, you know what, I just can't keep taking this as personally as I am, or we can't really do it this way or that way, because the bottom line is he's shown this is his style, and that's the way to go about it. But also, speaking of styles, let's get back into another remake of movies. A short little segment, as we've already discussed it, but it's still a movie that I really enjoy, not only just because it ties in so deeply with myself, but I legitimately enjoyed his take on it. I thought it was cool, and this is just a short revisit of us going back to Dario's Dracula, Argento's Dracula, his version, his take of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah, again with another remake. And like I said, and obviously with the Phantom of the Opera and stuff like that with this one, yeah, it's like, it was fun. It was we've already discussed this movie, but when I was going through my Dario movies and rewatching it, I was like, yeah, even though I just watched it already this year, I would watch it again because it's always fun to see it. It's just I love it because it's such a campy movie. It's probably, I would say, Dario's most campiest movie out of all the ones he's ever done. But then again, like I said, I liked it. I liked the spin of the Bram Stoker's, storyline, where he kept it sort of pretty close to the source material, but then, put his little spins on it and stuff like that. Plus, again, I'm never going to complain about Aja being in a film. So, and she's in this film. And as I discussed in the previous review for this, and I'll discuss it in this one.
She's naked.
Seeing her naked in a tub. I mean, I'll rewatch that movie a million times. We can review, Dario's Dracula every day, and I'd be completely fine with that.
No, absolutely. But the one thing too that I also like is, and it's just kind of fun to touch back on it a little bit, from the earliest segments, is the thing that's also kind of fun about Argento's Dracula, despite the fact that it's a much newer movie with more advancements and more updated stuff, better materials, better special effects. It was kind of a return to the Dario's red paint when it came to the blood, which when I watched the movie, which I've seen many times like you have, like I was like, I remember being like, God, I love everything about this movie, but God, that blood pisses me off when it comes to like vampire stuff. But then as I became more educated in Dario's work is when I began to appreciate it a little bit more, where I was like, okay, yeah, it's not exactly realistic, but it's definitely something you could kind of consider a trademark.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was,
which is a good segment, a good segue to go into it with trademarks and vampires. We all know, beloved vampire and his dark glasses, and that's Dario's latest movie, which was 2022, and in the day age of streaming, this was a Shudder original.
Yeah. No, for sure, which I thought was really, really cool, because I think that also shows the advancements in availabilities for horror and the idea of like going after the people that brought us to where we're at now, where I think Masters of Horror does deserve a lot of credit for going there first and collecting just the cream of the crop of horror, whether it's directors, writers, and so on and so forth. And then you have Shudder, which has really taken the throne of just the dominant horror streaming service, being like, dude, we want Dario. Like, Dario is the Dario Argento. We need to have something for him. We want to have something for him. And however those conversations happen are just however those conversations happen to, secure like how this is going to be. Is it going to be released on theaters? Is it going to be released on DVDs, or is it going to be released on streaming, and so on and so forth. But I do think it's very, very cool for Shudder to have Dario on their roster with an original movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it's cool too, because it's like, like I said, I mean, a lot of people will watch this movie, and yes, is it one of Dario's greatest hits? No. Is it one of his worst movies? No. The best thing in the world that I love about this is because the fact that we got a Dario movie. It'd been 10 years since we've got a Dario movie before he made this one. So it'd been so long. Like the last one he did was the vampire movie.
Yeah.
The Dracula. So it'd been 10 years. He wrote the script a long, long time ago, and I guess he just I guess he was probably just tired of doing the films and stuff like that. Just kind of wanted to live his life. And I love the fact that he, came back and did this film. And like I said, it's definitely got that craziness, kookiness of it. Obviously the title of this thing is Dark Glasses, and it kind of goes into lore a little bit and kind of in the stupidity of people bringing in the eclipse that's going to be happening, and people staring at the eclipse without protective gear and going blind because of it, or messing up with your eyes. And then she just decides to drive while her eyes are jacked up, and then she ends up going blind from getting into an accident. So it's like, yeah, don't stare into the eclipse and then drive and then get in an accident, and because you're going to go blind probably.
Right. So, let's have at least a little bit of thought into what we're doing before we're just going to go and rock off and go blind and not be able to see the beautiful things of this world.
Yeah, because like I said, even in this movie too, like before she goes blind, she's watching it always a lot of ties back to previous episodes of Vampire and Devil podcast. But in this movie, she's watching Maniac, and she's watching the remake version of Maniac with
Right.
Elijah Woods that we talked about. I'm like, how crazy is that? Like, you would think that, again, it being maybe because the fact that this is a newer movie and people wouldn't know that. So it's like, yeah, okay, let's put the remake of Elijah Wood and Maniac in there and watch a little bit of that before like I said, before she, goes completely blind in this movie. And like I said, this movie is really, really, really weird.
Yeah.
You got the blind girl, there's a killer that's going around and all this crazy stuff, and it's got to deal with dogs and people like working with dogs and like breeding dogs and kind of getting these dogs to eat and kill and then and then people go again, you get your people who hear about this and like, oh my god, there's a guy that's going around and training these dogs to be killers, and that's not cool, let's ban this movie. But before you do that, watch the movie again. Not only is it like before, he does the same thing again. Eventually the guy who trains these dogs gets bit in the ass because he brings home the blind girl's dog who is loyal to her, and he gets fucked up by the dog.
Yeah. No, it definitely does for sure. And one of the things that's kind of cool is like a closing point for this movie. We talk a little bit about we've talked a lot of music also over this episode. Is that Daft Punk was actually originally tapped to do the score of this movie?
Yeah. You know me. I mean, I'm not too much into the French, but there's been a couple of cool things about the French. You know, the shout out to the Gojira being able to play the Olympics and the France being progressively cooler than America when it comes to playing music on a grander scale of the world to see. And just like I'm a huge Daft Punk fan. Obviously, I like Masks and stuff like that. I like my face. I mean, and their faces and stuff like that. I mean, I was a sad day when Daft Punk decided to put the music down. But yeah, I think it would have been an interesting movie. I think I probably would give it extra more points if it would have been soundtracked by Daft Punk. I'm almost kind of curious to what that would have sounded like.
I could definitely see you on that. I think that would have been like really, really cool, to be honest. I would love to see to have seen them like get into like the score like world. I think they definitely could have done something cool
Yeah.
with that.
Especially if they would have tied something into it, because I mean, like, if some people know, Daft Punk did this score for the Tron, the second Tron, the reboot of the Tron series, the Legacy,
Yep.
and even have a scene in the movie where they're DJing and doing the music. So it would have been cool to see, like, this movie, and as messed up as this movie is, Tron's more of that sci-fi, which actually works very well for Daft Punk's music with that electronic. I would have liked to have seen what Daft Punk would have done in what would be considered a horror film.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. So, Devil, as we talk about, as we've just spent an extended amount of time talking about the great Dario Argento, let me start off with you with this. How do you see Dario? What is it about Dario for you? Because I love me some Dario. You're a Dario guy, though. So I find it important to start with you with this segment. Like, why Dario? What about Dario?
Well, first of all, he produced Ajar Argento, so he's already on my top list just because he him and Daria made this gorgeous woman that I love in Ajar Argento. But I've always been a fan. I did, I lived a few years in Italy, so I've always been cool with Italian culture and Italian lore and Italian stuff like that. So for me, I've always just kind of had that kind of like a feel of home when it comes to Italian stuff like that. So it's a little bit of that. I love the fact that, like his horror movies were kind of pushing the boundaries at times. And I like the fact that they were horror. He was doing horror movies that were also very, artsy, but not so artsy that you're kind of like a snob, like artsy, kind of snobbish, like that kind of stuff. But with, and even those artsy films that he was doing, he still really had a really dark undertone to him. I like the fact, like I said, even though there was some trauma and some bad things that happened in between things and stuff like that, but I did like the fact that, it was a family affair with a lot of the movies that he did with, with Daria and with Aja Argento. I love the fact that he did pretty much most of his movies with Goblin, and then when Goblin did their split, he still came back and did some stuff with Claudio from Goblin and stuff like that. So I like, just like any other director, I like that they use a lot of the same people. And then, like I said, you've got, so many great movies, so many great actors and actresses that have been in his movies. And like I said, I mean, Aja Argento and Jennifer Connelly, that's the stamp right there.
Absolutely, for sure. Like for me, it's like I like the artsy factor to it. I like the certain gore factor to it. I like the fact that he really would push the boundaries of things. I I always tread a little lightly on that idea of like watchability, rewatchability, and the possibility of the slow burn. And I thing I like about Dario's movies is he's mindful, at least in my opinion, he's mindful of the slow burn and kind of being wary of it, but also just being aware of when a part might be necessary for proper build-up versus when something's just dragging.
Yeah.
And that's what I really appreciate about his work, because I like artsy stuff. I do. I do tend to like my horror movies to be either, very like, kind of like demonic and witchy, or very just kind of like stabby and and like killery. That's the stuff that I really like. It's one of the reasons why I fancy so much, Insidious and The Conjuring and stuff. But then, of course, love my just good old swinging axe murderer movies and stuff like that. So I certain artsy movies, they have to kind of hit me in the right place. And Dario's movies, they do. While I had to do a little bit more work than normal to go out and hunt down these movies to watch. Not like they weren't easy to find. I just mean I don't have as many Dario movies on my shelf as like somebody like you would. But it was cool to go after these movies and watch movies, and also revisit some ones that I just hadn't really sat down and watched in a while. I love Suspiria, just hadn't really watched it in a while. Opera Can Do No Wrong, that movie's great, but I really enjoyed going back and revisiting The Masters of Horrors. I thought that one was really cool. But then again, going and seeing movies like Tenenbaum that I wasn't familiar with, that I was aware of, but never actually sat down and got to watch. So it was cool to see that, to watch that, and then even just touch base on some of the fun little kooky stuff that has just a brush of Dario on it in like Demons and stuff, which is always very cool. But I just love his unique take on things. I like the fact that he's got that very Italian artsy brush stroke, but the paint he uses is all red.
Yeah.
And I just think Dario's great. And I do hope that we get some more movies from him in the future. I mean, it's only been a couple of years now since Dark Glasses. And I know there's things kind of listed as like projects and stuff that he's involved with and stuff. But we'll just kind of have to wait and see. I'm definitely, looking forward to seeing what's, in the pipeline for him. And if there is any potential for watered down due to the climate change, or if he's still very stern about, look, this is my art, this is my style, this is what I do, and do we get that cool, like, yes, this is a Dario Argento movie. Only time will tell, but I really dig, and I look forward to it, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always like I said, as far as when it comes to Dario Argento, for me, it's always been like, he's always been on my list of like top directors that I've always admired. And like I said, before, I had the chance to meet him, and then circumstances, obviously family matters, or he, something came up and he had to do with that, which is understandable. But yeah, I'm like, maybe there's some hope in the future that we can maybe get maybe even see if we can get a little Dario love, and talk to him about just about like some of the stuff that he, where his mindset was, and for some of these movies and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, to me, like I said, Dario is one of those ones that, yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, because like you said, I mean, it's definitely very artsy, it's definitely very out there, it's definitely very European, definitely very Italian. And like I said, and with it, a lot of his stories, a lot of his movies are, like you said, that slow burn, but then it's not too slow. But then when it gets slow, it starts to go, and weird things come out of nowhere, like to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, you gotta wake me up. Boom. Okay, he just woke me up again. But yeah, he definitely, yeah. I mean, Dario Argento is not everyone's cup of tea. Yeah, especially when it comes to the masses of horror. You know what I mean, stuff like that, where most people are gonna be your Wes Cravens and your these guys and stuff like that. Where like you know. I feel like some people like Dario, but it's mostly those old school cats that like Dario.
I think so. I'm definitely. Thanks. We love you guys. Keep your eyes peeled. Keep your fangs sharp. Put a little pencil sharpener on your devil horns and keep those things feisty and painful. Because we got a top 5, of course, like we always do, of our favorite Dario Argento movies. So look forward to seeing that, hearing your guys' feedback, and seeing if you side with the devil, if you side with the vampire, or if you just think we're both wrong and you like your Dario movies this way. We definitely want to see your guys' feedback, and we look forward to it. We love you, Fangs. We'll see you soon. Horns up. Fangs out.
Devil, my friend.
What's up?
You like announcements?
Oh, yeah.
I like announcements. Thanks. We know you like announcements. We have an announcement. Devil, what do we have to tell them?
Oh, yeah. We want to tell you that Rockin' Horror is the official sponsor of Vampire and Devil Podcast. Oh, yeah. You want to buy our shit? Go online at rockinghorror.com and buy our shit.
Absolutely. At special events that you will always know about, where the devil is present and the vampire is floating around, you will be able to get official Vampire and Devil merchandise. We will make sure of that. We will make sure you know about that. But for all of you Gothic peeps, all of you Fangs, all of you Infernos that want to shop online, we are going to allow you to go to rockinghorror.com to get all of your official Vampire and Devil merchandise.
Oh, yeah. It's time to get bloody, get messy, and wear the shit that we like to wear.
Absolutely. Horns up, fangs out. Thank you, Rockin' Horror Apparel, and thank you, Mark and Janet.
Oh, yeah.